I'm Tasha, 22 female. I've spent the last 4 years of my life in a library carrel, fueled by cheap coffee and the promise of a future I was building for myself, brick by painful brick. I was the first person in my immediate family to finish a 4-year university degree, a fact I thought was a point of pride for all of us. I was about to learn that my accomplishments were only valuable when they didn't inconvenience anyone else's party schedule. This is the story of how my own family's casual cruelty on what should have been my proudest day pushed me to pack up not just my dorm room, but my entire life as I knew it. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The cap and gown had been hanging on the back of my dorm room door for a week, a silent, dark blue testament to 4 years of relentless effort. Every time I looked at it, a nervous flutter would start in my stomach. It was more than just a piece of fabric. It was a symbol of every 8 a.m. lecture I dragged myself to, every all-nighter spent memorizing marketing theories, and every sacrifice I'd made to get to this point. I'd worked 2 part-time jobs, one at the campus coffee shop and another doing freelance social media posts for local businesses, just to cover my living expenses and avoid taking on more debt than absolutely necessary. My parents, Mark and Linda, had helped where they could, but their finances were always tight, a fact they reminded me of frequently. "We're stretched thin, Tasha," was a common refrain, usually followed by a sigh that made me feel guilty for even existing. Despite the financial strain, they had always seemed supportive in their own way. The support came in phrases, little verbal pats on the back that felt good in the moment but evaporated like mist. "We're so proud of you," my mom would say on the phone, her voice distracted as I heard the clatter of dental tools in the background of her office. "Just keep up the good work." My dad was a man of even fewer words. His encouragement was usually a gruff, "Yep, that's great, kiddo," before he changed the subject to his latest sales figures or a problem with his car. They loved me, I believed, in the way you love a familiar piece of furniture. You know it's there, you'd notice if it was gone, but you don't spend much time admiring it. The real center of the family universe was my cousin, Jenna. She and I were the same age, a fact that had been the source of endless, exhausting comparisons my entire life. Jenna was my Aunt Brenda's daughter, and to hear Brenda tell it, Jenna was a gift to the world. While I was grinding away at my marketing degree, Jenna was studying communications at a less demanding private college an hour away, a school chosen more for its picturesque campus and social scene than its academic rigor. Her real passion, however, was becoming a social media influencer. Her Instagram feed was a curated masterpiece of brunch photos, fashion hauls, and selfie after selfie, each one accompanied by a caption full of hollow, inspirational quotes. My family found this fascinating. At every gathering, Aunt Brenda would whip out her phone. "Look at Jenna's latest post. She got over 1,000 likes. She just has a way with people." My parents would nod along, genuinely impressed. "Wow, 1,000 likes," my dad would murmur, as if she'd just cured a disease. Meanwhile, my 3.9 GPA and the marketing plan I developed for a local business that increased their sales by 15% were met with a polite, "Oh, that's nice, honey." The graduation plans had been discussed, or rather mentioned, for months. "Of course, we'll be there," my mom had said back in March. "We wouldn't miss it for the world. We'll all go out for a nice dinner afterward, wherever you want." I'd clung to that promise. I imagined us at a fancy Italian restaurant downtown, my parents finally seeing me not as their perpetually stressed student daughter, but as an adult, a graduate, a professional in the making. I sent them the link to the university's graduation page with the date, time, and ticketing information 2 months in advance. I followed up with a text a month later. "Just a reminder about graduation on the 18th. Can you let me know how many tickets you'll need?" The reply from my mom was a simple "got it." My dad didn't reply at all. I also called my grandmother, Helen. She was the one person who seemed to genuinely see me. A retired teacher, she valued education and effort above all else. "Tasha, my dear, I am bursting with pride," she'd said, her voice warm and clear over the phone. "I have a little something for you, a graduation present, I can't wait to give it to you in person. She lived 3 states away and her health wasn't the best, so I knew the trip would be difficult for her, but she insisted. I wouldn't miss this day for anything, she'd promised. This is a real accomplishment, a foundation for your entire life. Her words were a balm on the low-grade anxiety I felt about my own parents' casual attitude. In the final week leading up to the ceremony, the family's attention was, predictably, on Jenna. It was her 22nd birthday on the 19th, the day after my graduation. Aunt Brenda had been planning a massive surprise party for her. My mom was deeply involved in the logistics. I'd overhear snippets of their hushed, excited phone calls. "Brenda, do you think we need more balloons?" my mom would ask, a level of focus in her voice I hadn't heard directed at my graduation. "What about the cake? Did you order the one with her face on it?" I tried to bring up my own big day, to gently steer the conversation back. So, for my graduation dinner, I started to say one evening. "Oh, honey, let's talk about that later," my mom cut me off. "Brenda needs my help with this party. It has to be perfect for Jenna." I told myself it didn't matter. They were different events. They could be excited about Jenna's birthday and still be there for my graduation. The two weren't mutually exclusive. I reserved 4 tickets for them, Mom, Dad, Aunt Brenda, and my uncle, and texted the confirmation to the family group chat. "Hey everyone, got the tickets for the ceremony. It starts at 2 p.m. sharp on Saturday. Can't wait to see you there." A few thumbs-up emojis trickled in. Aunt Brenda replied, "So exciting." It seemed fine. Everything was set. The morning of my graduation, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I texted my mom, "It's finally here, so excited." No reply. I called my dad. It went straight to voicemail. I tried to reason with my growing sense of dread. They were probably just driving. It was a 3-hour drive to my university town. They were on their way. They had promised. I put on my dress, carefully steamed my gown, and adjusted the cap on my head, the tassel tickling my cheek. I took a selfie and sent it to them. "Ready to go?" The message was delivered, but not read. The silence on my phone was deafening, a stark contrast to the celebratory noise echoing through the hallways of my dorm as other graduates posed for pictures with their beaming families. I took a deep breath, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door, alone, holding onto the thin, fraying thread of a promise made in passing. The university's basketball arena, where the graduation ceremony was held, was cavernous and buzzing with energy. Thousands of students in identical blue gowns filled the floor, a sea of hopeful faces searching the stands for their loved ones. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and hairspray, punctuated by the joyful shouts of families recognizing their graduates. I found my assigned seat in the M section for marketing majors and craned my neck to look at the section where I'd told my family I'd reserved their seats. Section 112, row G. It was a good spot, with a clear view of the stage. And it was completely empty. A cold dread washed over me, a physical sensation that started in my stomach and spread through my limbs. Maybe they were just late. Traffic could be bad. Maybe they were parking or got lost on campus. I pulled out my phone again. My last message, the selfie of me in my cap and gown, still showed delivered, not read. I tried calling my mom again, straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Linda." I hung up before the beep. I called my dad. Voicemail. I called my aunt. Voicemail. A lump formed in my throat. I tried to swallow it down, forcing myself to focus on the processional music that had started to play. The deans and professors were marching in, their academic robes a riot of color. Everyone around me was standing, clapping, and waving to their families. I stood up with them, my hands clasped tightly in front of me, my eyes locked on those 4 empty chairs in section 112. The ceremony was a blur. I remember the drone of the university president's speech, the endless list of names being read, and the polite applause that followed each one. When my row was called to the stage, I walked with the rest of them, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. "Tasha Petrov," the dean announced as I crossed the stage. I shook the president's hand, accepted the diploma holder, and smiled for the camera as the flashbulb popped. The smile was a mask, a painful stretch of muscles that didn't reach my eyes. As I walked back to my seat, I risked another glance at section 112. Still empty. The hope that had been a flickering candle flame inside me was finally extinguished, leaving behind a cold, dark void. They weren't late. They weren't coming. I sat through the rest of the ceremony in a daze. I didn't hear the closing remarks or the alma mater. When the confetti cannons exploded, showering us in a cloud of blue and silver, I barely flinched. Students around me were hugging, crying, and making plans to meet their F. Amlies, I just sat there, a statue in a sea of celebration, until a friendly classmate tapped my shoulder. "Hey, Tasha, you coming? We're heading out to the main quad to find our parents." I just nodded, unable to form words, and followed the crowd out into the bright afternoon sun. The quad was chaos. Families were everywhere, holding bouquets of flowers and giant balloons shaped like the numbers of the graduating year. I stood on the edge of the crowd, feeling like a ghost. My phone, which had been so stubbornly silent, suddenly buzzed in my hand. It was a notification. Not a text, not a call, but an Instagram alert. Aunt Brenda posted for the first time in a while. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tapped the notification, my thumb trembling. The image that loaded felt like a punch to the gut. It was a group photo, a selfie taken by my cousin Jenna. She was in the center, wearing a birthday tiara and a wide, triumphant grin. Behind her, crowded together and beaming, were my parents, my aunt, and my uncle. They were in what looked like my aunt's newly decorated living room. A huge, glittery "Happy Birthday, Jenna" banner was stretched across the wall behind them. My mom had her arm wrapped around Jenna, her smile wider and more genuine than any I had seen directed at me in years. My dad was giving a hearty thumbs up to the camera. Aunt Brenda's caption read, "Getting the surprise party started early for our gorgeous girl. So proud of everything she is and everything she's going to be. Family first, birthday queen, proud mama." The #FamilyFirst was a special kind of cruelty. I swiped to the next photo. It was a picture of the cake my mom had been so concerned about. It was a 3-tiered monstrosity with Jenna's professionally shot headshot printed on the top in edible ink. Another swipe. A video. My dad was lighting the candles as everyone sang, "Happy Birthday." My own father, who couldn't be bothered to answer my call on my graduation day, was singing his heart out for my cousin's pre-birthday party. They weren't just an hour late, they were 3 hours away, celebrating someone else. They hadn't forgotten. Forgetting would imply I was on their minds in the first place. This was a choice. They had looked at their calendars, seen Tasha's graduation and Jenna's party prep, and decided which one was more important. I scrolled through the comments. "Looks like so much fun. Happy early birthday, Jenna. What a beautiful family." I felt a wave of nausea. I backed out of Instagram and opened my messages. The family group chat was silent. My selfie, sent hours ago, was still sitting there, a pathetic monument to my misplaced hope. They hadn't even opened the message. They were so consumed with celebrating Jenna that they hadn't given me a single thought. Humiliation burned through me, hot and sharp. It wasn't just sadness or disappointment. It was the deep, painful shame of being so thoroughly and publicly dismissed. I was a footnote in my own family's story. While I was sitting alone in a crowded auditorium, they were laughing and taking pictures, building memories without me. I stumbled back towards my dorm, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. The heavy gown felt like a lead weight, and the diploma in my hand felt like a worthless piece of paper. The pride I'd felt just that morning had curdled into something bitter and cold. I reached my empty dorm room, the silence a stark contrast to the party on my phone screen, and finally let the sobs rack my body. They hadn't just missed my graduation. They had erased it. The drive back to my empty dorm room was the longest 10 minutes of my life. Every corner I turned, I saw other graduates with their families, arms linked, parents carrying flowers, siblings laughing. It was like the world was putting on a parade of everything I didn't have. I slammed the door to my room, the sound echoing in the silence. The cap and gown, which had felt so full of promise this morning, now felt like a costume from a play where I was the only cast member. I tore it off and threw it into a corner, where it landed in a heap of dark blue fabric. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mom, a text message. My heart did a stupid little leap of hope. Maybe there was an explanation, a terrible emergency. Something that would make it all make sense. I snatched the phone up. The message read, "Hi honey, so sorry we missed your big day. Things got absolutely crazy here with Jenna's party. You know how it is. Hope it was great. We'll celebrate with you soon, promise? XOXO." You know how it is. The words were so casual, so dismissive. There was no emergency. There was just a party. A party that was apparently more important than the culmination of 4 years of my hard work. The promise at the end felt like a cruel joke. Their promises were worthless. I stared at the message, the anger building inside me like a pressure cooker. I typed and delete. Ed a dozen responses, from furious and accusatory to heartbroken and pleading. In the end, I just typed, "You had tickets. I was waiting for you." I hit send before I could second guess it. Her reply came almost instantly. "Oh honey, there must have been a misunderstanding. Brenda said the party setup had to be today, and we thought your ceremony was tomorrow. With Jenna's birthday being the 19th, it just got all mixed up in my head. My mistake." A misunderstanding. They were trying to frame their deliberate choice as a simple scheduling error. It was insulting. I had sent links, texts, and confirmations. The date, Saturday, the 18th, was circled on the family calendar in the kitchen. I'd circled it myself during my last visit home. There was no misunderstanding. It was a lie, a flimsy excuse designed to absolve them of any guilt. "The party is for her birthday tomorrow," I texted back, my fingers flying across the screen. "Graduation was today, I told you that." "Don't get upset, Tasha," she replied. "It was just a mix-up. Brenda was so stressed and I had to be there for her. Family helps family, we'll make it up to you." Family helps family. The phrase, paired with the picture of them beaming at Jenna's party, was a knife in the heart. I was family, too. But apparently, I was the kind of family that didn't count when my needs conflicted with Jenna's wants. That's when my grandmother, Helen, called. Her name flashing on the screen was a relief. "Tasha, my dear," she said, her voice laced with concern. "I've been trying to reach your parents all day. I'm at a hotel near the university. I thought we were all meeting for dinner. Where is everyone?" The kindness in her voice broke through the dam of my anger, and a sob escaped my lips. "They're not here, Grandma," I choked out. "They didn't come." I told her everything. The empty seats, the silent phone, the Instagram post, and the pathetic, misunderstanding excuse from my mom. She was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost its warmth and was replaced by a cold, hard anger I had never heard from her before. "A misunderstanding," she repeated, her tone dripping with contempt. "Linda knows exactly what day it is, and Brenda, that woman has been orchestrating this sort of thing for years. This was not a mistake, Tasha. This was a message." I had always known my grandma wasn't Brenda's biggest fan, but I'd never heard her speak with such venom. "Stay right where you are," she commanded. "I'm coming to get you. We are going to have a proper celebration dinner, just the two of us." 40 minutes later, Grandma Helen was at my door. She was a small woman, but she carried herself with an undeniable strength. She took one look at my tear-streaked face and the discarded gown on the floor and enveloped me in a hug that smelled of lavender and resolve. "This is not how this day was supposed to end for you," she said, her hand rubbing my back. "But this is not the end of the story." We went to that fancy Italian restaurant downtown. She made the reservation weeks ago for the whole family. As the hostess led us to a large, empty table set for 6, a fresh wave of humiliation washed over me. "It will just be the two of us," my grandmother told the hostess calmly, who nodded and removed the extra place settings without a word. Over plates of pasta that I could barely bring myself to eat, Grandma Helen started to talk. "Your Aunt Brenda," she began, "has always been deeply insecure. Your mother, Linda, is a follower. When they were girls, Brenda was always the center of attention, and Linda just orbited her. And Brenda is pathologically jealous of anyone who achieves something on their own merit." She told me stories from their childhood, tales of Brenda accidentally spilling juice on Linda's school projects, of misplacing invitations to Linda's birthday parties. It was a pattern, a lifelong campaign of subtle sabotage and attention-grabbing, and my mother had always just allowed it. When you came along, Grandma Helen continued, her eyes fixed on mine, you were so bright and independent. You didn't need the constant validation that Jenna does. Brenda saw that as a threat. Anything you accomplished, she felt diminished her own daughter. So she minimized it. And your parents, bless their weak wills, went right along with it. It all started to click into place. Every time my achievements were downplayed, every time Jenna's minor accomplishments were celebrated like major triumphs, it wasn't random. It was a system. A toxic family dynamic I'd been too close to see. So they didn't forget, I said, the realization settling in my stomach like a stone. They were told not to come. I don't know if Brenda explicitly forbade them, Grandma Helen said, shaking her head. She's more clever than that. She would have framed it as a choice. Oh, Linda, I just don't know how I'll get everything done for Jenna's party without you. It's just so much pressure. She would have made your mother feel like helping her was the most important, most vital thing she could possibly do. She manufactured a crisis to overshadow your success. It was a purposeful misunderstanding, designed from the start. The phrase hit me hard. It was the perfect description. It wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy, and my own parents were willing participants. The dinner was a turning point. The sadness was still there, but now it was mixed with a cold, clear anger. My grandmother had given me more than a meal, she'd given me clarity. And with clarity came the first flicker of a new resolve. I wasn't just going to be sad about this. I was going to do something. After dinner, Grandma Helen insisted on coming back to my dorm room. I'm not leaving you here alone tonight, she stated, and there was no room for argument in her voice. While I started half-heartedly packing some of my books into a cardboard box, she settled into my desk chair, a thoughtful, distant look on her face. The room was a mess of 4 years of accumulated life, textbooks, clothes, sentimental junk. It felt overwhelming. Like a physical representation of the life I now felt so disconnected from. There's something I need to show you, Tasha, she said suddenly, her voice pulling me from my daze. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a thick, worn leather satchel I'd never seen before. It looked old, the kind of thing that held important documents. She unfastened the buckle and carefully took out a bundle of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. These were your grandfather's letters, she explained. He wasn't just a good man, he was a very shrewd one. He saw the way the wind blew in this family long before anyone else did. My grandfather had passed away when I was 10. I remembered him as a quiet, kind man who smelled of pipe tobacco and old books. He was a history professor, and my grandmother, a librarian. They shared a deep love for knowledge and a quiet disappointment in their 2 daughters' lack of academic curiosity. Your grandfather and I, Helen continued, untying the ribbon, we always believed in the power of independence, especially for a woman. We set up trust funds for both your mother and Brenda when they turned 21. This was news to me. I had always been told that money was tight, that there were no family savings to speak of. They weren't enormous sums, but they were enough to give them a start, a down payment on a house, an investment, a safety net. Your mother and father used theirs to buy their first home. Brenda and your uncle used theirs to fund a series of, let's call them, creative, business ventures that never went anywhere. She handed me a letter. The paper was thin and brittle, covered in my grandfather's elegant, sloping cursive. It was dated a year before he died. My dearest Helen, it began. As I watch the girls raise their own children, I am filled with both pride and a persistent unease. Linda follows Brenda's lead without question, and Brenda's ambition is matched only by her envy. I worry for our granddaughters. My eyes scanned the page, my heart pounding. He was writing about Jenna and me. He had seen the dynamic brewing, even when we were just children. The letter went on to detail his financial concerns. He had built up a modest portfolio of stocks and investments over his lifetime, an amount separate from the trusts he'd given his daughters. He explicitly stated his intentions for it. I do not want this legacy to be squandered on frivolous pursuits or used as a tool for manipulation, he wrote. Brenda would use it to cement Jenna's status as the family princess, and Linda would simply hand her share over at Brenda's first request. This wealth, however modest, must be a tool for genuine growth and opportunity. My grandmother watched me as I read, her expression somber. "He never trusted them with it," she said quietly. "After he wrote me that letter, we went to a lawyer and changed everything. His entire portfolio, the house, everything we owned was put solely in my name. The will that was read after his death was a simple one. It just said everything went to me. Your parents and your aunt assumed that was the end of it. They assumed whatever was left would eventually be split evenly between them upon my death." She handed me another document, this one more formal, from a law firm. It was a copy of her current will. I unfolded it, my hands shaking slightly. It was dense with legal jargon, but one section was crystal clear. She had bypassed her own children entirely. The bulk of her estate, the house, the investments my grandfather had so carefully nurtured, her own savings, was to be left in a trust. And the sole beneficiary of that trust was me. I looked up at her, speechless. I couldn't comprehend it. It wasn't just a graduation present, it was a life-altering legacy. "Grandma, I don't understand," I stammered. "Why?" "Because." "He saw this day coming, Tasha," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Maybe not this exact scenario, but he knew they would let you down. He knew they would fail to see your worth because they were so blinded by Jenna's sparkle. He called you his scholar. He said you had a fire in you that they would try to extinguish with their neglect. He wanted to make sure you had your own fuel." She took a deep breath. "I was going to tell you this after the ceremony. I had a whole speech prepared. I was going to give you these letters as my gift, to let you know that you have a future that is entirely your own, that you are not dependent on your parents' approval or their financial support. It was meant to be a happy moment." Her voice broke. "Instead, it has become a rescue mission." The weight of it all settled on me. The years of feeling second best, the constant, subtle dismissals, the sting of today's ultimate betrayal, it all coalesced into a single, sharp point of understanding. My grandparents had seen it all. They had loved me enough to protect me from a future they could predict with heartbreaking accuracy. This wasn't just about money. It was about validation. It was the proof, in my grandfather's own handwriting, that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overly sensitive. The neglect was real, the favoritism was real, and it had been happening for my entire life. As I sat there on the floor of my dorm room, surrounded by the debris of my college years and the shattered pieces of my family relationships, I felt a profound shift inside me. The humiliation and grief were still there, but they were being crowded out by something else. A cold, hard resolve. My family had made their choice. They had chosen a party over my future. They had chosen to celebrate a manufactured image over a real accomplishment. And now, thanks to the foresight and love of the two people who had truly seen me, I had a choice to make, too. I looked at the old letters in my hand, at the legal document that outlined a future I never could have imagined, and then I looked at my grandmother. The rescue mission was just the beginning. Now, it was time to plan the extraction. The next morning, the dorm room felt different. The chaos of half-packed boxes was still there, but the oppressive cloud of despair had lifted, replaced by the clear, bright light of purpose. Grandma Helen had slept on the lumpy futon, insisting she was perfectly comfortable, and woke up with the energy of a general planning a campaign. Over coffee from the campus shop, the one I would never have to work at again, we laid out the first steps of what she was now calling the Great Escape. "First things first," she said, pulling a notepad and a pen from her purse. "We need to sever your financial dependence on them completely. You said they co-signed your student loans?" I nodded. While most of my tuition was covered by scholarships and federal loans in my name, my parents had co-signed a smaller private loan to cover the gaps. It was one of the few tangible things they had done for my education, and it was a chain that still connected me to them. "And your bank account," she continued, "is it the same one they set up for you when you were a teenager?" Again, I nodded. It was a joint account, technically. They hadn't put money into it in years, but they still had access. "Right," she said, making a sharp note on the pad. "Monday morning, our first stop is the bank. You are going to open a new account at a completely different bank, an account that only you control. You will transfer every penny from the old account to the new one. Then, you will call the student loan company and inquire about the process of removing a cosigner. With the resources you now have access to, you may be able to pay off that loan in its entirety. The thought was dizzying. To be completely free of them, not just emotionally, but financially, was a fantasy I had never allowed myself to indulge in. "But Grandma," I started, "the old habits of scarcity and worry dying hard, the trust. I can't just start spending my inheritance. That's for the future." She held up a hand, stopping me. "Tasha, listen to me very carefully. Your grandfather did not build that nest egg for it to sit in an account collecting dust while you struggle. He built it to be used. It is a tool. It is the lifeline he threw into the future for you. The first and most important use of that tool is to secure your independence." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "This is not about revenge shopping or frivolous spending. This is a strategic investment in yourself. The first phase is extraction. The second is fortification. You need a place to live, a reliable car, and the freedom to find a job you want, not when you have to take out of desperation." Her logic was irrefutable. We spent the next hour creating a detailed, step-by-step plan. We would use the funds from the trust to secure a lease on an apartment in a new city, pay of F the loan, and create a budget that would give me a comfortable 6-month cushion to focus on my job search. She knew a financial advisor in her city, a trusted friend who could help manage the trust and make sure everything was handled legally and responsibly. My phone had been silent all morning, a blessed relief. But around noon, as we were making a list of moving companies, it rang. It was my father. My stomach clenched. Grandma Helen gave me a sharp, decisive nod. "Answer it, be calm, be polite, but be a stone wall, give them nothing." I took a breath and swiped to answer. "Hello." "Tasha, hey kiddo." My dad's voice was breezy, overly cheerful. "The everything is normal act. Your mom told me there was a little mix-up with the dates. Sorry we missed it. We're on our way to take Jenna out for her birthday lunch. Just wanted to see when you're planning on coming home." Coming home, the words sounded alien. The house I grew up in no longer felt like home. It was just their house. "I'm not sure yet," I said, my voice steady, surprising myself. "I have a lot of packing to do." "Well, don't take too long," he said with a chuckle. "Your old room isn't going to stay empty forever, you know. We were thinking of finally turning it into a proper guest room." It was such a casual, thoughtless comment, but it was another little cut. They weren't just absent for my celebration. They were already planning on erasing my presence from their home. "I'll let you know my plans when I have them," I said coolly. "All right, well, listen, we'll see you in a few days. We'll do that celebration dinner then. Love you." He hung up before I could reply. He didn't ask how the ceremony was. He didn't ask how I was feeling. It was a logistical call, nothing more. When I hung up, my grandmother was looking at me with an expression of fierce pride. "Good," she said simply. "That's how you do it. Information is power, and right now, they have none." The rest of the day was a blur of action. We packed boxes with ruthless efficiency. I sorted my belongings into 3 piles: keep, donate, and trash. It was liberating to throw away old trinkets and mementos that tied me to a past I was determined to leave behind. As I worked, Grandma Helen was on her laptop, researching apartments in cities with strong marketing industries. Seattle, Austin, Denver. They were places I had only dreamed of. Now, they were tangible possibilities. By evening, most of the room was packed. My grandmother had booked a hotel for the entire week, giving us a base of operations. We had a timeline. We had a budget. We had a plan. The lifeline my grandfather had thrown into the future wasn't just a rope. It was a fully equipped escape raft. He had given me the what. My grandmother, with her strategic mind and unwavering support, was giving me the how. That night, as I lay in the comfortable hotel bed, a sense of peace settled over me for the first time in what felt like years. The anger at my family was still there, a hot coal glowing in my chest, but it was no longer a consuming fire. It was fuel. They thought I was still their quiet, overlooked daughter, packing up my dorm room to return to my designated place in the family hierarchy. They had no idea that I wasn't packing to go home. I was packing to disappear. They thought they had, at worst, made a minor mistake they could smooth over with a belated dinner. They didn't realize that they hadn't just missed a ceremony. They had triggered an exodus, and they would have no one to blame but themselves. A week later, I was a different person. I had a new bank account with a debit card that bore only my name. The private student loan had been paid in full, a transaction that felt like clicking unsubscribe from a lifetime of guilt. My grandmother's financial advisor had walked me through the basics of the trust, and for the first time, I felt a sense of security that was entirely my own. Most importantly, I had signed a lease for a one-bedroom apartment in downtown Denver, a city I had always wanted to see. The movers were scheduled to pick up my boxes at the end of the week. My escape was no longer a plan, it was in motion. All that was left was the final confrontation. It was my grandmother's idea. "You don't owe them an explanation," she'd said, "but you owe it to yourself to close this chapter on your own terms. You will not just fade away, you will make a clean break." She insisted it should be on my territory. So, I used my new debit card to make a reservation for 6 at the same Italian restaurant where she and I had our somber celebration a week prior. I called my mother to invite them. "I'm heading out of town soon," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "but I wanted to have that graduation dinner you mentioned." "Oh, of course, honey," she said, relieved. In her mind, this was the solution, the little gesture that would smooth everything over and return us to the status quo. When and where? I gave her the details. She was thrilled. "Brenda and Jenna would love to come too. We can make it a big family celebration," just as Grandma Helen predicted she would. "That's fine," I said. "The reservation is for 6. When I walked into the restaurant that evening, my grandmother was already there, looking elegant and composed. I felt a surge of confidence. I was wearing a new dress, one I'd bought myself, and for the first time I felt like an adult, not a child playing dress-up. My family arrived a few minutes later, a boisterous, chattering unit. Jenna was in the center, of course, already showing my parents a picture on her phone. My dad clapped me on the shoulder. "There's the graduate, ready to celebrate." My mom gave me a hug that felt brittle and performative. "You look so nice, sweetie. See, all better now." We sat down and the small talk began. They talked about Jenna's birthday party, about my aunt's new listing, about my dad's work. They did not ask about my graduation. They did not ask about my plans. It was as if the last week had never happened. I let them talk, sipping my water, occasionally catching my grandmother's steady gaze. The appetizers arrived, and Aunt Brenda finally turned to me. "So, Tasha," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, "your mom says you're heading out of town. A little vacation before you start the job hunt." "Something like that," I replied calmly. "You'll have to get serious about finding a job soon," my dad chimed in, gesturing with a piece of bread. "The real world's tough. We can't support you forever." This was my opening. I placed my hands on the table and looked at each of them in turn. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and firm, "I'd like to make a toast." They looked surprised but pleased. My father picked up his wine glass. "A toast? Excellent." I raised my water glass. "I'd like to toast to family," I began, and my parents smiled. "And to the lessons they teach us." This past week, I learned a very important lesson. I learned that promises are meaningless without action. I learned that a misunderstanding can be a very convenient excuse for neglect, and I learned that my proudest achievement was, to some, an inconvenience to be ignored in favor of a party. The smiles on their faces faltered. My mother's hand froze on its way to her glass. Aunt Brenda's eyes narrowed. "I sat in that auditorium completely alone," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "I had 4 empty seats in section 112. And while I was waiting, you were all 3 hours away, singing happy birthday and posting on Instagram with the hashtag #FamilyFirst. I looked directly at my aunt. Which is funny, because I thought I was family too. "Now, Tasha, that's not fair," my mother stammered, her face turning pale. "It was a mistake. We said we were sorry." "Were you?" I asked, my voice cutting through her excuse. Because being sorry usually involves more than a text message. It might involve, for instance, not immediately trying to pretend it never happened, or perhaps asking me a single question about the day you missed. I turned to my father. And Dad, your plan to turn my bedroom into a guest room? Don't worry, you can go right ahead, because I won't be needing it anymore. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. I slid it across the table. I've accepted a position with a marketing firm, I lied smoothly. It was easier than explaining the truth. In Denver, I've already signed the lease on my own apartment. I'm moving on Saturday. Stunned silence. Jenna looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. My dad's jaw was slack. Denver, my mother whispered. But that's halfway across the country. You can't just. I can, I interrupted. And I am. And as for your concern about supporting me, I looked at my dad. You don't have to worry about that anymore either. I slid a second document from the folder. It was a copy of the letter confirming my student loan had been paid off. I've handled my finances. Aunt Brenda finally found her voice. How? She demanded, her tone sharp with suspicion. How could you possibly afford all of this? I looked at my grandmother, who gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. Grandpa was a very wise man, I said simply, looking back at Brenda. He and Grandma always believed in the power of independence. They made sure I would have it. The implication hung in the air. The dots connected in their heads with visible slowness. The trust they had assumed would one day be theirs, the inheritance they had been counting on, was not for them. I didn't need to say another word. The look of dawning horror on my aunt's face was more satisfying than any screaming match could ever be. My parents just looked bewildered, like the rules of the world had suddenly changed without their consent. I stood up, placing my napkin on the table. Enjoy your dinner, I said, my voice devoid of anger, filled only with a profound and final sea. NSC of closure. I believe I am all paid up. I turned to my grandmother. Are you ready, Grandma? She stood as well, a small, triumphant smile on her face. I am. We walked out of the restaurant together, leaving them sitting in stunned silence at a table full of food they would have to pay for, a fitting metaphor for the future they had built for themselves. The chapter was closed. The day the moving truck arrived was bright and clear. My dorm room, now empty and scrubbed clean, echoed with every footstep. It looked exactly as it had 4 years ago when I first moved in, a blank slate. The difference was, this time, I was the one holding the pen, ready to write a new story. Grandma Helen stood with me at the door, handing the driver the last box, which was filled with the books from her late husband. A good library is the foundation of any new home, she said, her eyes twinkling. My parents had tried to call, of course. A flurry of texts and voicemails had come in after the disastrous dinner. My moms were pleading and confused. Tasha, please call me. We need to talk about this. You're not thinking clearly. My dads were tinged with an unfamiliar anger. What is this about, Tasha? Your grandmother has no right to go behind our backs. This is family money. They still didn't get it. They thought the issue was the money, not their actions. They saw the inheritance as their right, something that had been stolen from them, rather than seeing my independence as something I had earned. I didn't reply to any of them. There was nothing left to say. My aunt had been conspicuously silent. I could only imagine the furious, panicked phone calls she was making to my mother. Her daughter Jenna, the centerpiece of their family, was still financially dependent on her parents, with vague plans to build her brand after college. My future, once a distant and unthreatening concept to them, had just lapped hers, and the shift in the family power dynamic was seismic. They had spent 2 decades carefully curating a narrative where Jenna was the star and I was a supporting character. I hadn't just left the play. I had taken the stage, the lights, and the funding with me. Grandma Helen drove with me to the edge of town, her small car trailing the big moving truck. We pulled over at a gas station just before the on-ramp to the interstate that would take me west, towards Denver, towards my new life. She got out of the car and gave me one last, fierce hug. You call me the second you get there, she commanded. And you remember who you are. You are the granddaughter of a scholar and a librarian. You are smart, you are capable, and you are free. "Thank you, Grandma," I said, my voice thick with a gratitude so immense it felt like it could fill the sky. "For everything, for seeing me." "Oh, my dear," she said, patting my cheek, "you were impossible to miss." As I merged onto the highway, I adjusted my rearview mirror. For a moment, I could see the university town shrinking behind me, the collection of buildings where I had worked so hard and felt so alone. I thought about my family, probably gathered at my aunt's house, trying to make sense of their new reality. They had banked on my quiet compliance, on my willingness to accept scraps of affection while they feasted on Jenna's reflected glory. They had miscalculated. They had underestimated my pain, and more importantly, they had underestimated my grandparents' love. The drive was long, 3 days of open roads and changing landscapes. With every mile I put between me and my past, I felt lighter. I wasn't running away from something so much as I was driving towards myself. The anger and hurt were still there, but they were no longer the driving force. They were just passengers, and with every passing state line, their voices grew fainter. When I finally pulled into my new apartment complex in Denver, the sun was setting, painting the Rocky Mountains in shades of orange and purple. The air was crisp and clean. My apartment was on the 5th floor, with a small balcony that looked out over the city. It was empty except for the boxes the movers had delivered, but it felt more like home than my childhood bedroom ever had. It was mine. In the weeks that followed, I built a life. I unpacked my grandfather's books and arranged them on a new bookshelf. I started my job search, not with desperation, but with confidence. I went on hikes, explored coffee shops, and learned the layout of a city that held no ghosts for me. I sent my grandmother pictures of my apartment, of the mountains, of me smiling. One evening, a month after I had left, a package arrived. It was from my grandmother. Inside was a small, framed photo. It was of me on stage at my graduation, shaking the university president's hand. I was smiling, a practiced, hollow smile, but I was there. I had done it. Attached was a note in her familiar, steady handwriting. It read, "Proof. You did it all on your own. The rest is just noise. Love, Grandma." I placed the photo on my new desk. She was right. The noise from my past was finally fading. The empty seats, the birthday cake, the thoughtless words, they were all just part of the story of how I got here. They were the catalyst, not the conclusion. I looked out my window at the city lights twinkling below, a vast constellation of new possibilities. My family had forgotten my graduation, but in doing so, they had given me the greatest gift of all, the motivation to graduate from them, too. And for that, I was finally, profoundly grateful.